What's going on, everybody? I am BirdDog John. Thanks for joining us today, and we are going to kick things off here. It is 1 a.m. in Melbourne right now, and that is exactly where I am. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Robbie to the show. What's going on, man? All right, let's see. Hey, what's going on, Judson?
Hey, thanks for having me.
I do much more. We are joined with BirdDog Ian, who is at the Capture Summit over in Atlanta. So how's it going, man?
Hot and sweaty.
That's the most important question that our team can ask. Why are you needing this camera?
Now, I haven't tested this thing since it got here. This is something that I'm really excited that NDI did. That's cool. Obviously, there are lots of flavors here, but this is the 4250 line. And our little friend here. Say hello to my little friend. It's brewing in the back of my throat. Based on the recommendation of Senseless, we're going to give a Java Monster a try.
Oh, yeah, Pocky,
We
dude.
got a little Pocky, and
Yes.
I have been putting this off for an age.
Oh, I'm so excited for you.
There is a Snacks on Stream mystery box brought to you by my Snacks on Stream manager, Brayton. What's going on, Bugsy? There you go. What's going on? Bali, good to see you, man. What's going on, NetHab? Hey, what's going on, Judson? And hey, Kevin, good to see you, man. What's going on, Jeremy? How are you? Thanks for jumping on. Oh, it's all good.
Here we go.
What's going on, everybody? How are you doing? I am BirdDog John. Hopefully you're doing well on this. Is it a beautiful? Yeah, the blue skies. Hey, it's a beautiful day outside. I actually don't know because my head has been in the studio all morning trying to get my brain wrapped around a whole bunch of stuff. And so pretty excited that you have decided to join us today. There is a handful of people hanging around in the chat. And so I'm really excited that so many of you have joined us. The first thing I'm going to do, of course, like a good streamer, is double check the feed because it would be silly if you couldn't hear me. So it looks to be all good there, at least over on birddogjohn.tv, which is where you should subscribe if you want to follow any of the long form content that we do here on the show. And so I'm pretty excited that you are hanging out with us. Oh, Go Web. Yes. Okay. So we had daylight savings over the weekend, which means that it is now 11 o'clock and not 12 o'clock, which is what it would have been last week. And so sorry about that. I should have probably announced that last week that we were going to have daylight savings time, but there it is. Eastern Shore. This looks like Tom, who well, more on that in a moment. Hey, what's going on, Senseless? Hey, it's John. It is John. Pretty excited about today, and I know that there's a handful of support agents that are hanging out in the background right now. So again, more on that in a second. No 8 a.m. class today, so here I am. Excellent, M-Tash. Thanks for coming back. Appreciate it. What's going on, iPhone? Always good to see you, man. All the way from Warsaw, Poland. Everything looks good according to GoWeb. So it's been a whole hour that you've been sitting around twiddling your thumbs. So sorry for the delay, but here we are. We're live, good to go. And today is an exceptionally exciting day because I sent out a message to a handful of people and also to some internal BirdDog guys. Said, look, I want to have a discussion about NDI networking, about streaming, about the industry, about just kind of what's going on these days in the NDI world, in the BirdDog world. Want to get an idea as to what's actually happening out there, and not just from my vantage point at the support desk, which is a very unique stance. And so I sent out an email and a whole bunch of people responded, and a couple of BirdDog guys were like, also check these guys out. So I sent out emails to those guys too, and we got a whole handful of folks that said, yeah, I could be available at that time to talk about this stuff with you. And so super grateful today. We by all means go ahead and throw stuff in the chat. First and foremost, this is always a support chat and a support show. And so if I can't answer it live on stream, I've got Senseless is sitting in the comments, probably Balu, probably a handful of other guys that can definitely help us with support questions today. But I'll do what I can to answer them as well on the show. But we're going to have a discussion today with some folks in the industry about just NDI and BirdDog and a handful of things. And so I'm going to bring all those folks in and do some brief introductions to things. And so let's go ahead and start adding these folks to StreamYard. Hey guys, how's it going?
Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, John.
Doing well. Hey, Glenn. Yeah, it has been an early morning for some of you guys, right? So appreciate you joining. Glenn's getting topped off with the coffee, and so that's always an important step in the morning routine. I've already been through my pot of coffee this morning. You might be able to tell by the level of excitement in my voice. but anyways, no, super grateful that you guys have been able to join us. I'm really looking forward to just talking with some people. Actually, one of the pieces, and I know a couple of you guys feel this way. One of the things I love about like shows like NAB is I get to sit and actually talk with guys like this about what's going on in their world, in their NDI world, and what things are that what successes are they seeing, what challenges are they encountering, and how can we kind of work through those together. And so that's kind of out of the gates, one of the pieces that I am driving at with this sort of panel is that we want to just talk about things that are going on that they're seeing, but also some NDI. I'm going to steer the conversation a little bit into NDI networking and a couple things. So we'll go down that road just shortly. First thing I want to do, though, is kind of go around the panel and just do some brief introductions as to who you are. I'll do the name introduction, and then I'll just let you tell us, where you're working, what you do for a living, and where you kind of come into this conversation with BirdDog and NDI. So, Chris, let's start with you.
Well, good morning. I'm Chris Reed with TFS Broadcast. So we are a systems integrator. We're based out of Arkansas, and we specialize in, designing and installing broadcast systems for pretty much everyone. That would, cover the whole gamut of, education, broadcast professionals, house of worship, government, all those kind of folks. And that's pretty much it.
Awesome. So you do installs from like the ground up, like you do concept and design as well as install and everything through?
Yeah, that's correct. So we provide full turnkey services. So it's going to be, we come in on the front end, work with architects and design professionals to spec facilities, conduit paths, electrical requirements, all that kind of stuff. And then from there, we plug parts and pieces in as far as what equipment we actually want to use to, meet the client's needs. And then from there, we install it, configure it, train them how to use it, and also provide support later. So
awesome. Good. I have lots of great questions. I'm going to steer towards your direction today.
Okay, great.
So you're a perfect guy. Hey, John, let's switch to you.
Well, I'm John Mahoney from NeuralNet. We develop software for remote guests. We have a live-to-air product that allows 6 or 12 remote guest channels. So we are focused a lot on integrating our solutions, which are both SDI and NDI based, into sort of a broad range of infrastructure based on what the clients need. But we get to experience a lot of different feedback for where people are trying to go. We don't do the full suite of installs that you get with a lot of sort of the full suite installers, but because we are focused on a niche, we get to sort of observe and interact with a lot of other people who are doing other parts of the full install.
Awesome.
Also, we do a streaming alchemy show Friday. We do a lot of focus on things around vMix, scripting, automation. So happy to have you join us for that.
Awesome. Yeah, we should definitely have a chat with Tom on that too, because you guys are the vMix guys, and I've recently been an adopter, and so due to Tom. So we'd have lots to discuss there. He's to blame for my conversion, not to blame, to credit my conversion to vMix, but we're in a good place there. So you're integrating your product with other John, sorry. So you're integrating your product with other third-party platforms. Are you doing native NDI, or are you converting that, or how? What does that look like with what you're up to?
So we do native NDI. So if anybody is a pure IP, we work with NDI on the outbound feeds for each individual guest, NDI on the return. We work with Dante for audio, or people can go sort of old school SDI analog. So we're pretty flexible, but most of what we do is around NDI.
Right on. Okay, cool. Awesome. I'm going to be sending out like follow-up emails for most of you, it sounds like. So it's good stuff. Glenn, let's jump over to you.
Sure. Glenn Seaman, I'm the Director of Sales Engineering over at Broadfield Distributing. And, we're a distributor that focuses predominantly in the live production streaming media space. And we've been a BirdDog distributor since day one, been involved with NDI since day one. And, my role is kind of neat. I get, we rep, the cameras, the converters, the NDI switches, which we'll talk about, the switching software, the whole gambit. And in my role, I get to work with all of the dealers and a lot of times the end users and really kind of figure out what products, what workflows are best for them, how to configure systems. So I get kind of the behind the scenes look and work with some of the dealers to do that. And, I think John will attest, when BirdDog Cloud first came out, I was the first guy, I think, in the world that understood it. And during COVID, I think I was doing at least 1 or 2 BirdDog Cloud installs or demonstrations a day for almost the entire year of just getting people doing that.
Oh my goodness! Yes.
Working full NDI remote, which is a lot of what we still get calls for. Is how do we control cameras remotely? How do we switch remotely? How do we get sources from point A to point B? So, yeah,
Glenn is the guy. 2 things about Glenn. So Glenn is the guy that was like he would latch onto our launch of products really early on, and like champion them with Broadfield. And so we did a lot of cloud stuff, a lot of even just the early product. Like when I first came on and we had like P200 was pretty new. Glenn was the guy that was troubleshooting it with me on a regular basis to try and we were growing our knowledge base together. And I think it's pretty safe to say that when I started, that was almost 4 years ago now, but when I started, Glenn quickly became the guy I talked to the most in the industry as a one-man support department, and probably was the most gracious with my learning curve back in the day, because he also knew that although he was new with NDI, so was I, and BirdDog was navigating some uncharted waters, and so long association with Glenn here, but now you're doing these crazy installs with cloud and remote production and almost like global production, right? And so that's really cool to have you here with us. Mike, let's jump to you.
Mike Watson. I run a company called Video Approach in San Diego. So we primarily did production, sort of straight production before COVID, and we had dipped our toes into live streaming for several years before COVID, which gave us a nice advantage once COVID hit. But I, like John, had really not been a huge fan of vMix and software options. I didn't really think of that as a real switcher, or in fact, NDI was also on that list of things that I was not a big fan of. And the minute COVID hit and we needed to start doing around the world stuff from home, when we couldn't fly anymore, that was when I got on the vMix train. And as soon as I got on the vMix train, I was like, oh, hello, NDI. And I found BirdDog not long after. So we go out with live streaming. So we'll be out on a live stream later today. It's funny when you talk about NAB and meeting other people who do what we do. It had never occurred to me that people installed BirdDog cameras and then left them in the same place. All I do is set my cameras up and then take them down the next day, and then I go somewhere else, and then I set them up and take them down the next day. So all of my networking challenges come from, or all of my networking knowledge comes from, using a different network every day and going a different place every day and bringing your own internet and trying to use the client internet and trying to use multiple internets. So it's been a fun learning curve. I thought after sort of learning video and audio and lighting and all the grip gear and all that stuff that I'd learned all the years before that I was sort of done. And then a couple of years ago, now I'm an IT expert too. So that's
so yeah, you're never done, right? Like that's, I think across everybody grinned when you said, I thought I was done. And I just saw all 6 faces, these grins. Yeah, seriously. So it's, oh man, it's so fascinating, and I think that um yeah, it's perfect having you here too, because that's exactly the case. Like, and that this is my stated case when I started, when we turned the show on here today. I said, like I have these options about how I think the network should work. But in real world stuff, I'm not like going to the conference halls and setting this up. And so I can conceptualize things, but I've set up a handful of networks. And truthfully, alongside Glenn, when he's with a customer and he calls and says, okay, here's the situation. And then you can kind of map it out. But I'm not like go like doing hotel gigs every weekend or doing shows, in various places around the world or country or whatever. So, no, yeah, that sort of experience is exactly the place where NDI shines a lot. I think there's like huge potential there in what you're talking about there with Mike, with your experience. And so, yeah, you're going to have a very
My
unique
favorite
experience.
NDI thing is not having to run 3 or 4 cables every single place. So that's
Yes.
why I did not get on board with NDI for 140 megabit video, and I did not get on board for round the world. I got on board so that I could have a 100-foot Cat6 cable and plug it into my computer and then plug it into the camera, and I could do that 3 times. And so I can bring 3 sort of $20 Cat6 cables across the country and run 3 cameras. And you should see how much crap I had to take before that, as I'm sure you all know. But that's why that's my love for NDI is different than other people's love for NDI, I think.
Sure. Yeah. No, we've had several emails recently, and they said, I forget what the phrase was, save the Pelicans. And it was basically how much of a reduction of freight and gear that you need when you switch over to NDI.
Are you digitized for everyone, or for now? Everyone else is looking confused too. So it must.
Yeah, you're completely.
Oh, sorry. Let's try this again.
You're back.
Is it better? Okay. I blame Scan Converter. So the phrase was save the Pelicans, and it was like how much freight that you don't need to take anymore. Compared to what we used to have to haul around to going to shows, like all these SDI cables and everything. And so, yeah, we've had oddly several conversations just recently about that, about how much less gear you have to take to a show to do the same thing that you were able to do earlier on. So like, yeah, Mike, that's common, where it's like, honestly, I didn't really even give NDI 2 shakes until I realized I needed 1 Cat 5e cable, like it's like this basic. And even then I'm like, yeah, go with Cat 6, but Cat 5e will get you by if you need to. And yeah, it's a lot easier. PoE switch, we'll get into that, plug it in, power it on, up we go. And yeah, there's a level of convenience there that's really helpful when you're trying to maximize let's just shoot straight here. We're trying to maximize our profit margins, so that to be most effective with our time and our resources, but give the highest quality to the customer at the same time, right? So there's a great little merriment there between NDI and what you guys are up to. Well, you cannot have a show about streaming without having the king of streaming himself, Tom Sinclair, and I don't know if an introduction is even required, because you would definitely not you would not belong to the streaming world without knowing at least who Tom Sinclair is. And so I'll let Tom do his own introduction, but it's more of a routine at this point, isn't it, Tom?
John, once again, you are delusional and deluded. I just want to go on record as saying that early on. Yeah, I'm Tom Sinclair. My company is Eastern Shore Broadcasting. I do a Wednesday afternoon show called Streaming Idiots, because everybody that's ever done live streaming sooner or later does something, forgot to hit the record button, forgot to switch cameras, forgot to do, you get the idea, and you feel like an idiot. And I thought, well, let's gather all these idiots together on a regular basis and talk about live streaming. And we do a meetup out at NAB and have all sorts of fun with the idiots. But the company, Eastern Shore Broadcasting, we kind of serve the entry-level market, the folks that are just getting into live streaming, a lot of churches, a lot of schools, other kind of interesting companies that you wouldn't think are involved in this kind of get into it. And we teach them basically, how to do it all. the way we monetize that is that I design and build PCs for live streaming using vMix, of course. And, COVID blew us off the map, just, doubled our business overnight. I think there was one day where we got 80 phone calls. It was just incredible. And thankfully it is slimmed up a little bit since then, but I continue to love to work with folks that are just starting out. I had a call yesterday from somebody that had bought all the equipment. They bought cameras. They bought stuff they didn't even need. They got a list from somebody else, and they called me and said, "Okay, what do we do with this stuff?" And they were using NDI and didn't even know it. It was hilarious, but I couldn't laugh since I was charging them, $200 an hour or whatever the fee was. As I said in the pre-show, you guys are swimming in the deep end. I'm not even in the shallow end. I'm just in the baby pool. But that's right, because there's lots of babies there, and the babies need some support, and they grow up and they become more and more mature, and they decide that they don't need that $100 unmanaged switch from Amazon anymore. They need to grow up into something else.
Yep.
But sorry, you just gave me, I don't know, little ass reflex there or something like that. That is the scariest thing I hear anybody say is, yes, I bought a cheap switch on Amazon.
Yep. I've been using it 3 years. So what can I say?
I print just fine.
That's right.
Yep. Yeah. It's actually a really common thing where, all right. So, let's go down this road because Tom started it. So the NDI industry hasn't this is John talking from my experience here, but we haven't really done ourselves any favors, BirdDog included, by touting this line that just put it on the network and it works. If you're a network administrator in any level, like if you've dabbled in assigning yourself a static IP, that's the benchmark that you need to make. If that's the case, then that networks perform at various levels for various functions. And so there's a difference between VoIP packets as there is data packets over, and now we have these NDI packets, which are being delivered in real time. And, we're trying to keep the latency as low as possible with the full NDI flavor. And so, yes, you can use, in theory, the umbrella of put it on the network and it just works. That is true in some regards, but as Mike was kind of laying out a little bit, going to a hotel and plugging into their network and hoping that their DHCP server is going to issue IPs correctly and all that stuff, leaves the door open for a lot of how would you say it?
Issues
for a lot. Well, yeah, I mean, issues is correct. It just is there are a lot of variables that you're not controlling. And so me as a guy that likes to go in and kind of know that I can deliver on a guarantee, and I'm not as, let's say I'm not as flexible as other guys might be in this regard, but I want to go in and know that I can deliver this. It's going to take me this amount of time to set up. It's going to take me, I'm going to need to accommodate a few things, but the critical mass things about the network are going to be predictable. I'll be able to control those. So when you're going around to different venues, or maybe that's not an option, or budget is really constrained, or it could be a plethora of things, how do we get NDI? How do we produce consistent results with NDI? And what are your kind of entry level standards? And so let's just say you have a client, they want to set up a 3 camera and a keyboard NDI solution. We're going to use vMix because we got a bunch of vMix guys here. So we're going to use vMix. We're going to plug in the keyboard and the cameras to the same network that the computer is running on vMix. How comfortable are you with the NDI realm? And this is actually good knowledge just for me to gather from the market, to be honest with you. How comfortable are you with really basic static setups? Is that something that you've seen work really consistently, or do you gravitate to something else? And so as integrators and installers, Mike, let's start with you on this, because you had mentioned you were doing show. That's okay. And you can say not very much, but
No,
where do
I'm
you-
just kidding.
And we accept that you admitted you just learned networking. So, this
It's
is
true.
not
Let's-
your background. So,
Yes, we're all aware.
It
We've
is,
seen
it is, and it's the best way to learn is in the field. So, what's the baseline? So where did the question end up there? I made so much fun of it now I can't remember.
All good. So yeah, so when you're you're going to do 3 cameras and control in some fashion. It could be keyboard or not. That's a variable in and of itself. But we're going to do 3 camera shoot in a hotel or a lecture hall or a church, whatever. They've hired you out to come in and do the stream. What are you comfortable with the NDI protocol as to make this happen?
So I find that 3 BirdDog cameras and a keyboard, you can kind of get away with a lot. The unmanaged switch from Amazon is not unheard of with 3 cameras and a keyboard. It's not what I would recommend, but it's not unheard of. The problem comes with once you get into vMix and you start learning how to do new things with NDI. Now you're shooting NDI back and forth everywhere, right? So now you've got teams shooting NDI, now you've got teams on another computer shooting NDI, and now there's 3 or 4. Now there's 3 or 4 NDI signals, kind of coming this way and that way and around, and so everybody's all about the 4205, the M4205 switch now, and so I've had one of those a couple of months. I've got all the presets working. It's unclear how to test it other than to just put a bunch of NDI on the network. So I have, a small fortune in BirdDog gear. So I pay for John's boat indirectly. But all I can figure is kind of turn it all on and see if it works. And we've had good luck with that, stress testing. But I think moving forward, having some kind of NDI managed M4205 switch, everything on it. It's easier now that everything's on NDI 5 because all the BirdDog stuff is NDI 5 now, including the keyboard as of last week. Is that right, BirdDog, John?
Yeah, the keyboards and the cameras the converters are still in LTS 4, but that's doing decode on stuff. Like it's encode and decode, and in theory, according to NDI,
a lot of theory.
NDI 5 is backwards compatible. So maybe we should ask Glenn if that's true. I don't know if maybe what he has seen.
Yeah, no, NDI is very backwards compatible. I mean, there are points where it has broken. I think some of the older NDI 3 and previous devices have started to fall off the supported wagon, but for the most part, you can mix them all. First off, just want to correct one thing so people are looking for the right thing. It's the 4250, so it's the M4250 lines of AV switches.
Right.
And what I will say, I had one of our customers came up at NAB. First off, the industry has needed a standardized supported switch for a while. Netgear stepped forward and did that. This is going to sound like a Netgear commercial, but
it's every show on this channel.
I had one of my dealers come up to me at Infocom and said, since they switched to using the Netgear switches for NDI, they have saved over $1 million. And that is in install time, support fees, returned, going back on site, things like that. I want to kind of back up on something John said, just to kind of separate, NDI for video over IP, there's really 2 main standards. There's a SMPTE standards 2110 and NDI. I think the message and where NDI has gotten into trouble in the past is New Tech very clearly wanted to send the message that NDI works over standard networks. Yes, it does. It doesn't need 10 gig connections. It doesn't need 40 gig switches. It doesn't need the high-end dedicated cards that a SMPTE 2110 does. And yes, for a single device, a couple of devices doing things, NDI works over a standard consumer network. But, it's like anything. Like I tell people, it's like, hey, you can go to your grocery store and get a cheap HDMI cable and use it, and it's great until you start trying to push through, 4K 60 on it, things like that. It's like you need to choose where you're sending hardware, and one of the big things is looking at your network configuration. The switch is a big part. John, you and I were on a troubleshooting call not too long ago. We actually got together the folks from BirdDog, Netgear, New Tech, everybody, and myself, and we were all trying to troubleshoot this guy's network. And the funniest thing is we all looked at things, and it ended up being the silliest thing.
Yep.
But when listening to the guy, I realized, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. You've used the 2 network jacks on your computer for other things. What are you using to bring an NDI? And he was using a USB to Ethernet adapter, which, some of them are great, but not all of them are great. And you can buy 5 from the same manufacturer on the same day and not get the same performance out of all of them. And it's silly things like that. I think that's the big thing with NDI. We'll come back to the other question about how you set up your network, static versus DHCP, all those things. But you got to spend the money in the right places. And right. I think the other thing too is always be thinking about growth. I just was on a phone call with somebody else. They wanted to run Cat 5e. They're doing all this run. I'm like, sure, you could run Cat 5e, but why not do Cat 6? Do Cat 6a? Do Cat 7 if you can find it. You're going to run the cable once, and video is just going to continue over the Ethernet. It's going to be a standard. So run the best cable you can at the time. Don't cheap out on those things. There's places to cheap out, and some of this infrastructure is not, because it's going to be the first thing you end up changing.
Yeah. Well, and especially because the infrastructure is going to be there after you're done with this project 10 years from now. Like one of the interesting concepts that when I was listening to back, like 4 years in 2019, when I was really kind of introduced to a lot of this BirdDog stuff, and I got to meet the BirdDog team and everything at NAB. That was my first day of work, by the way. I say this all the time, but 2019 Sunday was my first day working for BirdDog, and it was working the NAB floor. And so that was like a drinking from the fire hose situation, where I was learning a whole bunch of like consuming a lot of information, but also then like trying to make it make sense to people who were also trying to consume information. And at that show, we had talked about the versatility of the product, but also like a whole range of things. But it don't, like to Glenn's point about like this sort of stuff, it amazes me that the support stuff that we really do, the things that that take the longest are generally not networking or NDI things. Like it's like, oh, I'm using this USB dongle. And so we swap that thing out, and it's like not all USB dongles are made equal, but like how much quality assurance are on those products. Like we're not entirely sure, and we probably can't find out if we want to. And so I'm finding that a lot of this, generally it's not the products, or it's not the switches, or it's not the infrastructure. It's, don't cheapen out on the network. When I was at NAB in 2019, they had said most of the world is already wired for networks. Like at least in North America, South America, Australia, like a lot of the countries that are consuming, a lot of Europe, it's already wired for networks at least a gig, if not better. And so, when you're installing things, to Glenn's point, when you're installing things, for an extra, 10 cents a foot or whatever it is for going from Cat 6 to Cat 6A, which is shielded and 10 gigs, that's going to now handle the 10 gig requirement we're going to see in the next, in the next 10 years. So spending that little extra where you should spend it, and having guys like Glenn who can make those subtle suggestions of like, hey, here's the major difference though. We just be going from Cat 5e to Cat 6. Like, here are the benefits of that. We'll give people long-term, results that will, we don't have to worry about later on, or you're not gonna have to rerun it when you want to do 10 gig speeds for something in the future. I don't know of an NDI thing that requires 10 gigs right now, other than quad and open gear. But those things are generally done over fiber at this point. So, we're talking about a different network aspect altogether. Okay. So it's interesting as things are evolving, where we go. And I think, 3 cameras and a keyboard, I have seen it. I've actually developed over some time, like some networking, like standards that I like have used in my brain, but I'm interested also to know like scenarios where, I think it makes sense, because as NDI becomes useful to people, so Mike is saying we don't necessarily, I wasn't even thinking or looking at NDI until, a certain threshold was hit, or pandemic, or ease of use, or what have you. but people start using it, and what I notice is, and maybe you guys notice as well, when people start using it, then they start realizing how flexible it is, and then they start adding to that fleet. And so then we add vmix to the mix or something like that, and all of a sudden now we want to route, my vmix outputs, I'm going to make them all NDI out and shoot them across the network to TVs and monitors and what have you. Well, now your requirement went from 3 streams to like a whole bunch of destinations, and we need to talk about your network infrastructure and how can it actually handle that much data. So there's a wide conversation. Let me throw this conversation out there. When you are, let's stick with 3 cameras for now. What are your kind of go-to, like, do you have any sort of like a go-to best practices when it comes to how you configure a network? Do you gravitate towards a static network because it's a matter of training the end user to understand how the network is set up? And I understand that like static networks and IP addresses, whatever, can be pretty simple to explain. Like it'll always be at this address. You'll always, it'll never change and all that sort of thing. I don't know where people stand on some of this, and so I'm curious to get your take. Chris, do you have a take on some of this as to like?
Definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, typically, in a network architecture, most basic network architecture, when we're doing NDI with 3 cameras, I mean, a lot of times we're going to adopt kind of a hybrid static DHCP network because, we'll statically assign the things that need to talk to each other all the time that will never change. So that would be like the cameras themselves, the PTZ keyboard. But for ease of use for the end user, if they just want to be able to plug a computer in and use NDI tools, you really need a DHCP segment on the network as well. So being able to do both and have a network architecture that allows both, I think a lot of times in our experience really simplifies it for the end user, because then they don't have to think about the statics that are fixed that are never going to change as long, and then if they plug into the network, to add any additional equipment, it should just acquire an address via DHCP and everything handshake pretty much automatically.
Gotcha. So I like that. I mean, that is the issue. It's like, well, what if you bring additional devices to a pure static network? Then you're going to need the end user
and
to understand how that's
most
all
of these
configured.
end users, as we're discussing, they're not networking experts. And you get on the phone with them and you go, okay, you're on this subnet. What's the last octet? What's an octet?
Yeah.
What's my subnet mask? Well, what's that mean? So you start having those conversations, and it's like, okay, plug into the network. You have internet access. Okay, I can team view in. I can talk to everything on your network now, and I'll get you squared away.
Right.
So those kind of things, trying to simplify, think of ways to streamline and simplify the architecture. And I think a lot of times it becomes a hybrid situation of static and DHCP.
I mean,
Gotcha.
There's another element to what Chris is saying, and that's in DHCP, you can actually, based on the MAC address, assign a constant IP to a specific device.
Correct.
And that means that you can take devices which are all DHCP enabled, but in your particular network, you can set them up so that they will get the same IP address every time.
Right.
And that means that if you take that BirdDog camera and stick it on another network, it's not going to be like, oh, can't see it, don't know what to do. So you'll always keep that DHCP flexibility, even though in your network, you are assigning consistent, virtually static IP addresses.
Right.
across.
Yeah. It brings me an odd level of joy to hear people using DHCP reservation lists, because it's something that I know I'm touting a whole lot, and
Right.
I know Glenn probably also understands it's a little bit tricky with the M4250 series. There's actually a way to do it, and I've created a few weeks ago we talked about the 4250. I actually made a video on like, here's how you do it. But I don't know if this bug has been fixed. This is insider information now, but there was a bug inside the 4250's firmware that if you set up the DHCP reservation list, which you have to do on the main UI page, if you make a change then over on the new user interface, it wipes that information. And so the DHCP reservation list has to be the last thing that you do on that switch. And I was asking about it back in April. Again, there have been updates since then. I don't know if they corrected this. It doesn't appear so, but I was talking with Netgear about it because I was setting up the network for NAB, and I wanted to be sure that my proof of concept was actually going to work. So I talked to the developer of the actual NDI protocols for Netgear, and he had said, like, yeah, that's how I would do it. And he's like, now there's just a catch here. And he said, if you set up the DHCP reservation list on an M4250, and then you go inside the web UI and make changes, it'll erase those settings. And so it has to be one of the last things you do. But setting it up this way, I mean, in my mind, and now shocker, I agree. I mean, I think that the reservation list is the way to provide consistent results with the end user, so that, like, yes, these cameras are always going to be at the first 3 or 4, whatever IP addresses, and they only have to remember like 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and they can always get to their web UIs without them constantly changing. But it also gives the flexibility of, I can bring products into that network that will get an IP address on their own, or I can take these products off of this network if we want to, like, these are church cameras and we want to do something in the teen room, but there's a different VLAN over there, or we want to take these cameras and go to like the senior citizens home, and I don't know why you would live stream out of a senior citizens home, but you know what I mean, like change the network, and they would still work on those external networks.
We don't call that a live stream.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh no!
So John,
So it's just a stream. Is that what we're talking about? Or
Yeah. It's all what day of the week.
Live work.
First off, you'd be amazed. I had people doing live streams out of funeral homes during COVID. But a couple things. So I want to also tout the virtues of DHCP reservations. The way I explain it to people is you can do things with static IPs. The thing you've got to remember with static IPs is nobody is necessarily in charge. A device comes on, it says, this is my IP address, I'm here, and nobody needs to check on me. When you are doing DHCP, when something signs on for DHCP, the DHCP server looks at it, recognizes it, builds the path to it. When you do things with DHCP reservations, it's the same thing, where the device comes on and your DHCP server says, oh, I see your MAC address, I know it, I'm going to give you the IP address that you're supposed to have, and I know how to get to you. So the DHCP server is managing the path. I have seen problems with fixed IPs where things just come on and other things can't find them. They just don't really know them, that they're there, because the path isn't built. So DHCP reservations is probably one of the best way to do things. DHCP, if you can go all DHCP on your network for NDI, it's great. NDI loves that. If you need to do fixed IPs, DHCP reservations are the way to go. On the Netgear switch, you may not know this, John, there is a new piece of software Netgear just released called Engage.
Yeah,
Engage
I saw that.
is designed to manage multiple switches. So now, if you have multiple M4250 switches or other Netgear switches, you now have a single management page where you can manage those. I need to talk to them because originally when I saw this, DHCP reservations was added to the Engage, because really the network switches that we're dealing with were never designed to do DHCP services.
Yeah.
They weren't designed for that. They've grown into it. So the problem is that the UIs to manage that have become convoluted. So Netgear's approach was to move that functionality to the Engage software. The Engage is neat. I would check it out. It gives you, if you've got multiple switches, gives you a central location to update and manage all of the switches, update the firmware, do all of that. But I am another one, constantly have problems. I mean, two turntables and a microphone, 3 cameras and a controller is easy setup, but it's also one of the biggest problem areas depending upon your controller.
Yep.
And I see those all the time, and 90% of the problems come from fixed IP addresses. If you just say,
Right.
let's put these on DHCP, the problems go away.
Well, and part of the thing with NDI is that it queries the MDNS a lot more than we think it does.
Yep.
And so when you strip it all down like that, then you end up having, the broadcast requests go out, especially on the decoder side or on the keyboard side. I have found that you end up having a whole bunch of problems finding sources. And so the decoder, for example, we hit the refresh button and it doesn't bring back any sources, or we search on the keyboard and it doesn't bring back the cameras that are there. Well, literally what it's doing is two functions. One, it's querying the MDNS to find out who's there. And if there isn't one, then all it's doing is listening for broadcast requests, which are active, which on an NDI device in the latest SDK and an NDI 4 for that matter, those broadcasts are based on a randomized algorithm. And so sometimes they're broadcasting and sometimes they're not. And the reason why they did that is because they were the original code had just constant broadcasts all the time. And they were getting flooding. They were flooding people's networks with just broadcast requests. So we started plugging in 5 or 6 different, cameras, and then it started flooding the network with all these broadcast requests. Well, what they did to cut down on that traffic was to run this algorithm. And so it only runs kind of sporadically. And we're talking, we're not talking seconds here. We're probably talking milliseconds. But when you do a search, it's instantaneous. And so having an active MDNS is actually pretty critical because you have a full-on list. Now, here's a concept that I've had recently in like the past 6 months, and I'm willing to throw this out and see if anybody has any thoughts on this. I think static networks are possible, but I think a requirement for a static network has to be Discovery Server. Discovery Server is basically the response to not having an MDNS on your network. And so you point all your devices at the Discovery Server and it keeps an active list. So then when the keyboard searches and it knows that there's a DS on the system, it queries that list and finds the cameras that it knows are currently active. And the cool thing with Discovery Server is it runs and it shows, when you connect a device and it powers on and it's properly configured, it will list it in the devices, on Discovery Server. Now it's an active list. So it's kind of annoying because it kind of disappears into the abyss. But, when you first plug it in, you can literally watch it on the screen and it will show the device showing up on the Discovery Server. And I've had pretty good results with customers who don't have the budget for a 4250 because they're not super cheap. In the networking world, they actually are. So if you ask a network guy, hey, is $600 reasonable? They'd be like, that's a steal for a layer 3 switch. But for folks that just don't have that option, then the other option is, okay, well, do you have a laptop, a PC that can run a little program at all times? And if you do, then a pure static network with a Discovery Server might be an option. And again, I've had pretty good results, but I'm not doing this in the real world. I don't know if anybody's encountered that sort of thing.
I would say, I think that's great on larger networks. I would be curious how that would float with Tom's customers. They no offense to your customers, they barely understand IP addresses. Now you're going to tell them that you got to put a Discovery Server somewhere.
Mm-hmm. They don't understand IP addresses.
Yeah, and that is the danger, right? Because NDI went to the market and was like, this is for everybody. And then they said something like, just put it on your network. And it's like, whoa. There are way too many. Those are really big bites that you're taking. And we should probably say, talk about do you need an IP camera? Oh, you don't know what that is. Let's provide some education. And then it's what sort of network do you have? And then, oh, well, let's talk about good, better, and best, But yeah, you're right. Discovery Server adds a layer of sophistication, which is why when I talk about static networks, and I don't know what your exposure is to my networking training videos, is I always say static is fine, but it's more complex. It's not simpler. So people just say I just went in and assigned the IP addresses and now I can't find them. It's oh, there's so much going on here already that, understanding. It's strange too, because I think the protocol was designed on a DHCP TCP network. And so I think NDI took the resources that were available for passing the packets as quickly as possible and the routing tables that come with DHCP services and a plethora of other things. And they built it on that. And it works really well in that specific configuration as a plug and play solution. But when we start stripping those things away, that's when we find that we run into issues. And so we can, the DHCP reservation list, I feel like that's equally as confusing as Discovery Server for talking to customers that don't understand IP stuff. And so when we come to the table with a new customer and they're like, hey, I just bought these BirdDog cameras. I want you to help me set them up. like what avenues, what poisons do you choose to drink to get this customer to get consistent results? But also, is it, do you buy the thing where you can go in and get this working on pretty much any network, or do you gravitate towards like, okay, but let's maybe, explore and probably set up your network correctly with the correct items so that, later on down the road, you're not going to be getting a phone call. Because then it goes back to that thing I mentioned earlier, right? Where it's like, they're going to realize, whoa, this is really cool stuff. Like NDI is great. Hey, vMix does NDI out. Let's like click. Hey, ProPresenter, it does NDI out. Like turn that on and let's set up all these things. And all of a sudden, like the data usage just kind of goes through the roof.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem you end up with Access Manager as the native, where you have to continually update it. And so at least with Discovery Server, as long as every new device you add is saying, I'm going to use Discovery Server and I configured the IP for that, then it works. But when you go to something like Access Manager, which is that middle ground, then it's just chaos because, oh, I did these 3 systems, but I didn't do that system. And now they're seeing different views of the NDI universe they're operating in. So it becomes really tough where you want to get somebody set up correctly, but the concept of that expansion is going to happen. And if they have to do a lot of different things to make that expansion work, then it becomes problematic. So you're sort of challenged on that side, but you're then challenged on the other side where if I'm using sort of the auto discovery MDNS world, that you end up with a lot of these other issues where if I get more complex with a lot of different devices all competing, then you're not seeing stuff, and it's
right.
Or you got multiple switches and suddenly MDNS isn't flowing across the way you thought, and you're not getting these devices visible on that other switch.
Right. Yes. No, that's interesting. And that brings up an interesting question. Just as you were kind of talking it through. Well, anyways, maybe I won't go down there just yet. But yeah, so, well, okay, no, I will. So the question is this: as installers, as guys that work in the NDI realm, or working with first-time customers, or working with people that are just getting into the game, what are the things that you wish the manufacturer would say so you don't have to say them? So behind the scenes, and I'll tell you why I asked this question, is because BirdDog is working on being better at education. And that's one of the jobs that I've been tasked with. It's like, okay, we gotta start educating people as to like how to do this and what to expect from us and what to expect from their networks and all that sort of thing. What are some of the things that you wish people knew when they encounter the NDI world, that they that information is readily available, that it's not a surprise, or that it's not a gotcha or something like that? What do you wish the NDI world would do better when it comes to making sure people know what it is that they're talking about, what they're buying?
Well, I would say, I think, as we're discussing this, the most critical piece to NDI working properly is the network configuration, the network architecture, and clearly understanding that although NDI is simple, it's not that simple. And there's, I get tons of, when I start having conversations with clients about, well, we're going to bring in NDI to your workflow, even if it's a traditional SDI baseband workflow, we may add an NDI element, and they're going, well, I've heard of NDI, it doesn't work. It's not reliable. And a lot of what that is because, the industry is saying NDI, plug and play, Cat 5e, existing networks, no big deal, go to town. Yep. And they plug it in just like what we're talking about. It's real quick and easy to saturate a gigabit connection with 8 NDI streams. And then you start having frame drop issues, and you start having, other things going on, and a non-network expert's going to look at that and go, well, that's just not working, and walk away from it. So I think that's the big thing, is that, potentially, manufacturers in the industry could do better when, talking about NDIs is making it clear that, yes, it is simple and it does work really great, but there are these checks that you need to make sure
Right.
are covered when you're doing this.
I echo that. I had a conversation with a guy who, let's say he was well versed in NDI, and he had just said, yeah, NDI does work great when your network is configured for NDI. If you just toss it out there, and I thought, well, that's interesting because it's not really the marketing message that we hear, but like, as you may have discovered, this is a support show. This isn't a sales show. And so I'm interested in figuring out how to get this to work correctly for customers so they don't have to open a support ticket. Like it would be great if I was bored at work, but there's lots to do. And, I want to be sure that we're asking and answering the correct questions. And part of it is it's like, yes, it's an IP protocol, and you really have two lanes to swim in, 2110 or NDI, and here's what's required for either. Now, in contrast, Glenn, I think it was you that was mentioning this earlier, like the requirements for NDI are a whole lot different than 2110. And so I think if you understand what's required for the other one, then to say, well, NDI just works, on your network is understandable because, compared to what it is that we need otherwise, we need to like specialize our network to do these high bandwidth resources. But for somebody that's just reading the marketing initially, that could be confusing.
Do we all agree that NDI needs to be on its own network and internet needs to be on its own network? Is that a collective thought here? No,
yes,
not really.
And there's
Really depends.
It depends, but there's multiple reasons you do that.
Yeah.
I think always like to discuss a production network. The first benefit to doing that is when you get into corporations, when you get into places with real IT departments, it's really easy to draw that line. It's like, okay, this network jack is the house network. You can control that, Mr. IT guy. This network jack is my production network, my switch. You don't touch it. You don't do anything on it. So there is that. There is also, I see this a lot. People forget how, I describe NDI as that noisy child in the back of the bus saying, hey, I'm here. Pay attention to me. Pay attention to me. NDI will flood your network. NDI will get everywhere on your network. And I have seen, our own show. So Broadfield, we do 2 weekly broadcasts, a week, one to, dealers, the other one to end users. And I have seen our own shows fail because of too much NDI traffic and other things going on the network. So, a couple of years ago, we redid the whole network and said, no, let's really stop and let's isolate this. Let's build the networks right. To John's thing, I think, and Tom will chuckle at this one, we're putting NDI in networks where people don't even know the password to their router.
What's the router?
And it's still the default password from.
I thought it was just admin.
Yeah, it's admin.
But it's the default password that came from their ISP. They don't know. We're doing that. NDI is making it simpler and simpler. And John, I think Tom mentioned it. I do have people that come to me with a shopping list. They are buying all this stuff. They don't know they're doing NDI. They saw this, somebody recommended this, they read this somewhere, and then buying all this stuff. And then they do the silly thing of saying, well, I don't want to spend that much money on this switch. I'm going to put something else in there, or I'm going to use this.
Yeah.
I think NDI is simple, period end. It is really simple. And yes, you can plug a camera into any network jack and pretty much grab video from it. And that is the beauty of it. But people, the message that needs to come out, I don't think it's a manufacturer message. I think it's just the message always needs to be said that NDI is great and powerful, but you have to invest in the backbone. You have to build the backbone. You have to have discipline. IP is software. IP is technology. You need to update firmware. You need to stay current. You need to test everything on a bench before you mount it and then find out it doesn't work. You need to test it on a bench before you ship it on location. The amount of times I get phone calls from people, NDI doesn't work, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, how do you know it doesn't work? Did you test it before you shipped it? Because if you tested it before you shipped it to your customer, now we're dealing with, is it the cables? Is it the network? Is it, what number of things is it? I'm a firm believer in, I get it. I put it on the bench. I plug it into my environment. I know that it worked in my environment. If it goes somewhere else and it doesn't work, yeah, sure. Maybe it got damaged in the moving from point A to point B, but most likely the problem is isolated to something at the remote location. I know it worked when I left my house, and I did the firmware updates. I got everything current. That's the other thing too, is, NDI, versions of NDIs, even though NDI is backwards compatible, there are issues where, this firmware doesn't work with that version of NDI. And it's not the NDI's fault. It's the firmware on the camera, the firmware on the device.
Yep. No. And real quick here, I'm just going to give guys, we've consumed your whole hour. So if you do need to bounce, I totally understand it. I appreciate you being on here. You can, and thank you very much. I'll be in touch with you after the show if you got to go. If you can't tell, Glenn deals with a lot of installers, and Glenn works with guys that varying degrees. And so I've asked him this question: how many installers do you know get the gear and set it up and test it on the bench before they take it to location? Because we get a lot of tickets, and the reason that question comes out is we get tickets from guys that are in the field. Hey, I'm here today. I'm setting this up. We've just unboxed these cameras and they're not coming on the network, or they're not working, or I set them to static and now they're gone, that sort of thing. And it comes down to a workflow thing, like a workflow question. Sometimes it's like a project that has to happen right away and there's no time to test bench it or whatever. And so the ideal scenario isn't there. But in general, like I don't put things into production, me personally, that I don't spend some time with. And so having a guy like Tom, for example, who is going to build you a machine and set it up and probably train you on it before you flip the switch on Sunday morning and start streaming your church service, that sort of level of integration is not necessarily done across the board. And so that's why I ask about I appreciate Glenn saying, well, it's not necessarily up to the manufacturer to make this right. But I also think I'm one of the options to help make it right. And I wonder, okay, so we're not gonna be able to only sell to installers who are gonna set up the test network and make sure everything's working and fully up to date, which I would love if that ever happened as a requirement. But people are gonna buy it and put it in their workflows, and how do we get that to a place where they're getting consistent results? Because at the end of the day, I mean, their concern is, we're here today, we want to send the bill tomorrow, we want to invoice this, we're going to provide them training on the weekend when they have a church service, and then we're going to be done with this project. And if they show up in the main piece, which is one of the main pieces, which is the cameras, the eyes to the stream, are not working, how do we mitigate those problems with? And maybe it's like, well, as an installer, these are the things that I see, or as a distributor, here's a common issue, or from a manufacturing standpoint. Tom, I mean, I think I need to bring you in here and say, when you're, first of all, let's just say you're gravitating towards an NDI installation, or you've explained the NDI flexibility to somebody, they decide, okay, we're going to make an investment here. What do you do to preface the conversation about, where it is that you about how to utilize this NDI network, especially when we're talking about with vMix and all the, Glenn, I've lost you here for a second. When you come back, I'll bring you back in. How do you broach that conversation so that it's just not constant frustration with the customer's interaction with a fairly sophisticated piece of hardware, right? Like, we've said it already here in the show, is that like NDI is not necessarily, it's a simplified workflow, but they're not simple products. They're actually quite sophisticated. And people that are using, these broadcast lenses, for example, which is what the P200s, which is basically the entry-level camera next to the 100 series. How do you approach that conversation? Tom, I'm going to turn that to you. So if you have a new customer, they've run into NDI, how do you approach them so that they don't get super overwhelmed with how complex it can get?
Yeah, John, my customers fall into two categories, and I hope none of them are watching. Dumb and dumber. And I have
You
to
might need to
determine,
change the titles of your categories to
I have to
secure your
determine
business.
which category they fall into to determine whether or not NDI is even an option. Because for the dumber category, we're not doing NDI just because it's a bridge too far. For the other category, yeah, we can take NDI and we can kind of dumb it down and deal with some basics and and do it on the path of least resistance, and it's a very workable solution. The guy that called me yesterday was doing NDI and didn't even know it. In fact, he had a separate some sort of ATEM clone set up that he had the cameras hardwired into that and had the cameras plugged into the network switch and was running vMix and was using the switcher to switch vMix. Didn't even realize that he had 2 NDI cameras in vMix that he could switch on his own.
Oh, wow.
And
Is that the dumber category?
he exceeded the dumber.
Okay.
But
we've discovered a new category this morning.
yeah, it was an anomaly category. But going back, John, to your original question before you dumbed it down for me, was that I think it's really a pain issue. How much pain can an installer deal with before they decide to change their install workflow so that they don't endure that pain every time? And how many times have I talked to somebody and said, "Oh, well, yeah, let's just unplug the cable from the back of the camera." And they're like, "Well, the camera's 90 feet in the air." And I say, "Well, did you bench test it before you blah blah?" And
Right.
And at that point, their pain threshold is really high, and they're going to learn from that forever. I have a client that I work with probably 3 times a month on different installs. They have their own install crew. We're just building the equipment and shipping it to them. And, one by one, their install crew is enduring pain and then realizing they've got to bring a little higher game to this. So, I don't think you're going to find a way to keep people from experiencing pain.
But I think, Tom, to the point that you were making, I think everybody needs engineering support as an integral piece of their production team. You can't, we got to the point where we were like, it's really simple. You can use a little ATEM mini and you can stream. But the thing with NDI is that you are now moving people to attempt to do things that are more sophisticated, that have multiple streams with multiple timings and audio going different paths than video. So all these things are happening. So to pretend like sort of as an industry that you can do this without having a real engineering person, and engineering is now biased towards IP engineering versus baseband engineering, but you still have that role now. And with more sophisticated things, you could have that on site. For simpler installs where you have somebody like Tom becomes that surrogate engineer. He will come in and jump in and can handle all the basic stuff that you're going to need to do. But you still need in your planning to say, I need somebody who knows how to diagnose a problem, who knows how to break it down and say, I can break it into a bunch of simpler pieces. I can sort of figure out how to debug something. And that's an engineering discipline. It isn't necessarily the way a creative, person would necessarily view building a production. But an engineer sort of starts from there. It's like there's a lot of little components and we can break it down and figure out what isn't working and then build it back up fixed.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting angle because like I mentioned earlier, one of the functions that I've been tasked with is kind of like generating a lot more like educational material so that people who want to learn can dive in and learn, something about networks and what to expect and terms and all that sort of stuff. And so, but what was interesting to me is that you said, a creative mind, and that is really true. It's something that I've kind of overlooked, I think. But a lot of folks that are producing shows are not like tech heads. They're creating an art form, which is, in so many disciplines around, whatever, throughout the working world, much of what people do is really an art form, whether or not it's, producing a show or whether or not it's speaking on stage or, whatever it is. So much of it is a craft that they're working through. And the technical side of things, like to actually get down and diagnose things, that a lot of that relies on a logical brain of, being able to follow through process of elimination and troubleshooting steps. And so it's like, who do you hire for as like ticketing agents, for example? Do you hire people who are super creative, or do you hire people who are analytical and like have a logical way of thinking? And you find benefits in both, but really diagnosing problems on a regular basis, it requires a certain like mentality. And curious if I'm still hearing this regularly, and it's being echoed back into this conversation of like, yes, there's a little deeper need for some available content for people to learn. But I'm also curious as to like, is the way that I'm presenting this appropriate for the creative brain to at least get a conceptual grasp as to what it is that's being done, and like how you sort out your NDI network, right? Because I think I'm speaking clearly and articulating my thoughts correctly, and Tom disagrees.
Creative brains are hopeless. Just, if you start with that premise, you're not going to be disappointed. But if you think you're going to take somebody that's creative, I mean, I've worked with some wonderfully creative types and tried to help, shove those round pegs into a square hole, but it's not a good fit. They either got it or they don't.
That's a doozy. We're going to get a reputation here on this show that we're
anti-creative. You have to careful on that one. I think there are creative brains that embrace technology and look at the technology and find the ways to be creative with it. So you've got a mix. I mean, yes, as a whole, a lot of people that are creative are thinking of more what's coming on the other side of the lens versus how they're getting into it. But there are a lot of creative people that look at this and say, "Oh my God, wow, I can do this now with this technology."
Yep. No, you're absolutely right.
But creative people, I mean, if you think about it, because I think creative people are additive in their approach to the assets they have in front of them. They look at different ways to combine different things to make something new. An analytical person is deconstructive. They look at something that's complex and sort of sit there and say, how can I break this down into smaller bits that I can understand and manipulate? So I think it's not that one is sort of like deprecated in some way, and like I just think that it's the approach of dealing with the elements in front of you that is different. And it is actually the tension between the two is what we're talking about. People that are creative see NDI and look at the additive possibilities. They're like, I can pull this from there and this from there, and I can sort of overlay them, and I can do, and that is what's creating the challenge on the engineering side, because as they're doing that, there isn't anybody who's really looking and saying, whoa, well, these are on separate networks, or this now you're running traffic through here that's way over what you would need to reliably, so all these things that you sit there and think about when you engineer something is sort of, you need to have both dimensions to be successful in producing something.
Yeah. And how many times, I mean, I've been in countless meetings where it's like the creative person has a vision for what he wants to produce, and then he like lays it out there, and the analytic people are like, this is almost impossible in our current infrastructure. Like, we're going to need to, let's talk about VLANs, let's talk about subnets. And the creative person's like, no, they all plug in with the Ethernet thingy. Like, they should all talk together. It's like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. So that's my challenge, is it's like getting it to a place where we can explain what's going on and people can understand it. But if it's, anyways, I've maybe I need to rethink some of that, mapping that out as to what that looks like. And for in the chat, that we're not dropping like flies here. Guys do have to go, and so we are letting them leave during the show whenever they need to. But yeah, and Tom, to answer your question, yes, I am monitoring the chat. So I think you have a networking question. Feel free to drop it in the chat. We can talk about it at some point here. But anyways, this is great info, because really, you guys are the guys that are talking to clients and talking to people in the market, and really like seeing the projects unfold. And and truthfully could probably give me some, let's say, constructive criticisms on how we can do that better, Glenn. Big grins all around about like how, how we can obviously service that market better. But there's also an element of like, I always come back to the question is like, why, what are the hangups? What are the hurdles that customers are coming across, and why are they there? Like, customer he's bricked his camera. Well, like, we'll fix that today. Like right now we'll get on that and figure out what's going on. But how was that possible? How did they get to the place where they're contacting support because they bricked their camera? And so those are the things that I've also want to think about, is like the bigger pictures as to like, okay, we need to fix this for the customer today. But the bigger thing is, we need to figure out a way that this isn't a possibility, because now we're supporting and we're servicing customers where as they could be, up and running and their camera's not giving them any sort of issues, and then being able to do their productions and not have to circle back with us and spend all this time doing that. So though I want to, I'm constantly thinking about that as, we talk about these sorts of things, because in particular with the networking conversation, how do we set up customers for the most successful way of doing things and making sure that they have the ability to have repeatable results and it's not going to be frustrating for them and what have you. So, I'm always looking to figure out what those solutions are. But anyways, I digress. I continue to ask the same question. All right, let me just jump up here real quick. I just want to make sure I'm not missing any sort of. Yeah, Art Senseless makes this point. Our support department probably sounds like Netgear sponsors us for most of our tickets. It's true. This is a very common. People are like, I'm having all sorts of problems with my network. What do you guys recommend? And so there is only, to my knowledge, one manufacturer that has an actual sanctioned NDI profile, and that is the Netgear 4250 and 4300 lines. And the 4300s are really more backbone devices at this point. Like they are used in AV installations, but they're more backbone driven. And so that's where we go. We go at 4250s is generally where we go, and they're the if you think about networks, you have like the core, the center of the network that branches out into other places around your network. And then you have these 4250s, which are kind of like the switches that operate at the extremities of the network. And then your BirdDog devices plug into those. And so it flows through this kind of master network. So yeah, we definitely talk about the 4250. We by no means, and I don't think anybody here is getting like some sort of Netgear kickbacks. They're just the only ones doing it. I wish we did, because we talk about it all the time. We'd be making a fortune. But yeah, we definitely love that. I'd run 42. There's one sitting right here on the ground that's running these cameras that you're looking at here, which I have like 5 or 6 different cameras around the network that are all doing a whole bunch of stuff. And it works pretty well. Works pretty great, and that network is working well. So I'll give the floor, Chris and John, and Glenn is back. So I'll let you guys. Yeah, so regionally, like if people are looking for integrators or installers, John, if they want to talk to you directly, where can they reach you? Because we should really throw it out there that, where they can, now that the other guys are gone, we'll give you the platform to let people know where they can reach you and what services you offer. Chris, why don't you start?
Yeah. So like I was saying, we're based out of Arkansas, but we cover pretty much, the middle part of the country, so all the surrounding states around us. We have done work in pretty much all areas of the country because we provide broadcast engineering support for, some TV truck clients that we have. So mainly, our systems integration services are regional to the Midwest South area.
Awesome. And you do everything from concept all the way to final install and training.
That's correct. Yeah. So,
Fantastic.
in the area that we're in, we're kind of in the Bible Belt. So house of worship is a huge market for us.
Oh,
yeah. Especially in the house of worship world, we do full AVL. So that's going to, audio, video, lighting. We have lighting designer on staff, and then, we can work with, like I said, architects and folks like that. And, live sports venues have been, that's kind of my background. I worked as a TV truck engineer for several years. With folks like ESPN and CBS Sports, NFL Network. But So live sports is a area of strength for our business as well. And then we've kind of branched into those other areas, just kind of out of our geographical location, as necessity as for the business.
Sure.
So
what's the web? Would you guys have a website they could visit if they want
do.
to?
Our company, we just recently rebranded to TFS Broadcast, but our traditional name is The Field Shop. We've been in business for 32 years. So our website is just fieldshop.com. So
fantastic. Awesome. So yeah, check that out if you get a chance. Get that web traffic going on that website and see get those hits going. John, why don't we shift to you? And just give us a brief where can we reach you, and if we want to learn more about what it is that you're doing, where can we look that up?
Okay, so we're in the New York, New Jersey area, so we're just outside of Trenton, New Jersey. But so I want to make clear that we don't do general systems integration. We are basically a software development group that produces sort of remote guest solutions for clients. And we have core products, but we also have done custom installs. But by and large, what we're focused on is when people want to integrate with us, we want to understand sort of the environment they're putting us into. And most of our engineering support tends to be remote. So we'll ship a system, or people will install our software, and then we'll get on to that system and make sure everything is configured to work in their environment. But if people want to see what we're doing, the website is neuralnet.com, GNURALNET.com. And, we'd love to talk to you, love to give you free trials of the product, any of the above.
Great. And now you guys also have a show that you do once a week on Fridays, or
Yep.
when and where is that?
So we do a show every Friday, and it tends to focus mostly on, automation, but we work with, vMix primarily, but we do other things with TriCaster, and it's pretty broad. I mean, we go from doing Node.js examples for how to control things to, basic, how do you just take and use standard automation inside vMix to do, basic production types. But so we are on at 2 p.m. Every Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern time, because it's 2 p.m. Eastern time every Friday. And it's a very flexible, open live show. People ask questions, very interactive. So it's not.
Did I miss it? Or is that on YouTube, or where is that? Or is
it's
that
on YouTube
site?
and Facebook.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Awesome. Thank you. Glenn, if people are wanting to get stuff from Broadfield and get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so Broadfield's based out of Mineola, New York, so Long Island. I'm based out of Dallas, Texas. Typically, if you're working with a video dealer, I'm fairly easy to get to through them. Broadfield also kind of has a consumer-facing end, which is Video Guys. That's another way of getting to me, through Video Guys. But typically, I'm working through dealers. I'm working through those relationships, not directly with end users, most of the time. But I'm fairly easy to find. It's also Glenn, one N, Glenn with one N at broadfield.com is an easy way to get me to. And
Glenn is the guy that I bring in when I need the big guns.
One thing I think you could do, John, I was looking at some stuff when I was going through some issues with my computer a minute ago, but white papers that you guys could create. The only book I know that's out there, I mean, NewTek's got some stuff. Paul Richards from PTZ Optics kind of wrote the unofficial NDI guide.
Yep.
I think those things help. People do read. People, people are finding these online things of like, oh, here's what somebody bought, I'm going to buy this. If we, as the dealers, distributors, users, had somewhere we could say, you know what, if you're looking at NDI, read this. This is a best practices guide. I can send them to the PTZ Optics one. It's great, but it's, and it's generic enough, but, I don't know that BirdDog wants to put PTZ Optics on their website any more than PTZ Optics wants to put BirdDog on their website. But I think
I don't think that's going to fly. No,
here's a little white paper to read that is best practices. If you can put something in front of somebody and say this is best practices, and either the creative says I don't know what this means, and they give it to somebody that does, or what, but that would be a big help.
Yeah. Okay. So we are.
I agree completely.
That white page is happening. I can spill the beans on that. They are. We have that with our. We actually hired a guy to do our documentation because if you're with us in the early days, the documentation was technically challenged, and so we have a new guy over in Australia. He's been with us for like maybe a year now or whatever. But man, he has changed the way that we do documentation. It generally, there's a lot of documentation at BirdDog, but it's gotten a lot tighter, and he's very good with making sure that's all. So I have given my technical specs to him, to which they have said, this is great, we're going to put this in a document, which they didn't question very much of it, which I thought was a little odd. But anyways, I've actually taken the New Tech University course, and I found out that what Kane says and what I say is pretty much the exact same thing.
Yep.
We were just saying the same thing and not knowing it, which is great. I'm thrilled that his conclusions are the same as mine. But the other piece is, so question though, for the remainder of the panel here is, do you find people are more willing to read? Like if we were to come out with like there's like a PDF document that they could like read, or if we offered like bite-sized videos that people could just watch, would that be more attractive or less? Because I need to put my focus somewhere. And like we could have a database with basically like a coursework of just videos that they can just click through, because that's initially what we're doing. And so I don't know anything. I don't know what DHCP is, and they click on the video that explains what that is, and it's 2 minutes. And
I could see a combination of both for sure. I mean, because it's like, I think as we were discussing at different levels of technical knowledge and different levels of implementation, there's going to be a need for shallow, knowledge and deep knowledge, right? So, it's like we worked with a local university to install a campus-wide NDI VLAN recently, right? And so we've got P200s around the campus, and NDI shooting back and forth and going here and there. So it was real nice to have. We shared white papers from New Tech and that kind of stuff to at least get the conversation going with their IT guys who are used to these enterprise class networks that don't do NDI. So those kind of things, I think some of both for sure.
Okay.
It's based on your audience. I think that's the key thing. Is if you're trying to do the novice, for lack of a better word, then videos are great. If you are, but there's nothing better than saying, this is not my job, and I email this white paper off to my IT guy and say, this is what you need, and I wipe my hands of it. There's a lot of that. There's just, here's the specs, you go figure it out. Right.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, I think figuring out what you need to know is half the challenge, because people won't even sort of go to say, I'm going to download this or I'm going to watch this, unless they have a sense that there's an urgency. There's
it's required. No, you're right.
Yeah. But I have to tell you, if you get more technical, when you're in a computer closet with systems buzzing all around you, and you have to try to figure out how to configure something, the last thing you want to be doing is looking at a video on your phone. So, I mean, so having that piece of paper with like the 5 things I just need to do here while I'm like crunched in between 16 different things in a room that's 800 degrees. Make it simple. So that piece of paper is great.
Hopefully your server and headrooms are not 800 degrees, because there's other problems. You're definitely going to have networking issues if that's the case.
I have been in clients where it's like, oh my God, this is 1 degree away from total failure. But yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, guys, look, thank you so much. I'll release you now. I've held you 30 minutes extra so you can bill me. But actually don't do that, because I don't have any way of paying you. I'll buy you a drink at NAB if I see you.
Perfect.
But
Great.
No, thank you so much for joining us, guys. And seriously, I mean, if you've been generally watching the chat or whatever, it has been going like crazy. I'm going to follow up with the chat here after. I'll cut you loose, but seriously, thank you so much. It's great to chat with you. Great to learn about what it is you're doing, but also to hear about what's happening in the industry. And I'd be thrilled if you would join me again in the future to do more discussion like this on here. I'm incredibly grateful. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome, guys. Take it easy. Have a great afternoon. And we will bring those guys back one day when they're able again. That was great to have a chat with them. And so I really appreciate guys joining us. Thanks for keeping the chat going. It looks like I've had my guys handling things behind the scenes. But I'm going to just briefly run through the chat and see what else I missed during the conversation, and then we'll finish things up. So, hey, Jeremy, what's going on? Nice to see you. I feel like this is the fellowship of the stream. Yes, it definitely was. I was feeling more like the heads of the five families, like a little Godfather reminiscent. And so we had a good had lots of heavy hitters on the stream. The NDI pros are all teamed up. It's true. It's quite the group. Good discussion. Hey, we need those BirdDog converters on NDI 5. It's true. And we've been talking extensively with the engineers about what that means and how quickly we can do that. And so it's on the roadmap. I don't have a launch day for that, but it is definitely on the roadmap for that. Hey, what's going on, Matthias? The integration changes when you are connecting to house internet for streaming. That's my larger issue with houses. You can still be on your own network and configure how you want until you add someone else's network config. It's true. And I believe there's actually somebody that said, I'd like to know the end result, Scott here. I'd love to hear the conclusion of the 3 cams and a keyboard. Final suggestion. I've live streamed since 2019. I've always wanted a single cable solution. I've not successfully done that with the M4250. All right. So the way to do this, and I think we were kind of alluding to this, but we never clearly articulated this, was you set up a VLAN on the 4250 for your NDI5 profile. And then on the default, while you're setting up that actual DHCP system, you reference the default gateway as the gateway that's on the internet network. And so that way it allows the internet to pass through the VLAN. So you get the internet packet so you can stream on that same network. There's 2 ways to do this. But anyways, you do that. So you only light up the VLAN ports that you're going to use for NDI. And then you can either pass internet to that VLAN and plug in your computer and stream off of that one, or how I prefer to do it is you have a machine like vMix or whatever that you're streaming from that has 2 individual MAC assigned network ports, and you plug one into your NDI network and you plug one into your internet network. And if you're using like the flat VLAN 1, which is like the unassigned VLAN, if you're using that as your internet network, so let's just say, let's back this up a little bit so I can explain clearly. Let's just say 192.168.1 is my general network that has internet on it, but I want to isolate my production network to its own VLAN. So I'm going to say, I'm going to make its own VLAN, and that network is going to be called 192.168.10 dot something, right? So it's the 10 VLAN. So I've isolated it now. So I've got one cable that comes out of my computer, goes into the 10 VLAN, and one that comes into the unassigned or the 1 VLAN. That way I get internet and internet traffic, and I can flow out to the internet through that port. But then I have an isolated NDI network that I can only communicate, and only the NDI packets can communicate from within that VLAN. And that way it keeps the lanes clear from the flooding of NDI, because if you just put it on your general network, NDI stuff goes everywhere. And so you can isolate it that way. And it then it really does help increase performance, because the packets and the things that aren't supposed to be talking to the NDI network can't. So ideally, this would be a DHCP governed network. You use the DHCP reservation lists as the way to assign IP addresses to those BirdDog devices, and even the computer in this instance. And then you have a secondary network that has your internet and the rest of your regular network traffic that's just bringing in the internet for you, so that you can pipe out your stream out of vMix or out of whatever into that. And that way, when you hit search on the keyboard, it just pings the MDNS that's on that 10 VLAN, and it's a quick return. There's very little waiting, and there's, the list will be readily available. So ideally, that's how I like to do it. And we got a general consensus from the panel that DHCP is the way to go. If you need to assign static IP, really look into DHCP reservations. Avoid assigning statics to the individual cameras, as Glenn was saying, because the network doesn't know that you did that. But if you assign them in the DHCP reservation list, the network does know. And so the network is aware that these addresses are reserved for this MAC address. Whereas if you do it statically locally on the device, the network is unaware that you've assigned those. Actually, and the network doesn't even care that you did that. And so that creates all sorts of issues. So anyways, that's in brief. And if that was more confusing than clarity, shoot me a ticket and I'll try and do better next time, or come back on Thursday. We could definitely take a slower walk through this. What a group! I agree with you, Tom. Yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. We had a great turnout. Lots of people watching. Half of the services that I connect to tell me how many people are watching the stream, and half of them don't. And so we've had a great turnout today in terms of people actually watching the stream. And it's probably because, we had Tom Sinclair, who is the eye candy of the streaming world, on the show. And so that's precisely why you were all here to see Tom. And I totally understand, because that's part of the reason I'm here, is because Tom was going to be on the show. So that's good. That's good stuff. DHCP reservations for the win. I would agree. Michael and I are in lockstep about this. But that reservation list is the deal. Let's keep scrolling here. Memorial services are really are a big industry, just as consistent as taxes. And insurance only pays for services rendered. So funeral homes are jumping to add streamings to their offerings. So interesting. During pandemic, we saw a huge increase of people that were streaming funerals, and they wanted a halfway decent lens, and they wanted to be able to do that. And that's no joke. Streaming services for funerals is a big deal. Not just because of pandemic and people being locked away, but it was more about now it's like people can't make it. They can't come up to Michigan from Texas to attend a funeral. And so if you stream it, this has actually happened numerous times. Little known fact about me, I'm from Toronto originally. And so as that community that I grew up in is aging, the people that raised me, for example, in the communities that I was a part of, as those people are passing away, I can't get back to Toronto all the time to attend funerals. And so they stream them now. And that's, doing it well and making it a chargeable service, like to the point where you want to charge for that service. That is, that's definitely a revenue stream for some, and people want to do it right. So I prefer DHCP in a router separate from the switch. Oh, okay. So you like to use the switches in the layer 2 function. Fascinating. I mean, by all means, if it works for you, by all means, but you are using a DHCP, and I appreciate that. Yeah, that is a great add to a package for those people who just can't make it, and they still want to be a part of it. Agreed. I mean, it's a huge thing. And I think the better you do it, like you could bring a guy on to do the streams professionally and do 3 cameras and a keyboard and make it really nice. And that would be a valuable service for a funeral home or for memorial services or what have you. NDI is straightforward. It's not simple. NetHab, I saw you say this, I echoed this in the conversation. I saw you say that right about then. And I appreciate that. Buy fiber. Please know what you're doing when you buy fiber, but yes, buy fiber. Hey, this is a good conversation. I agree with you. Absolutely. I enjoyed that conversation wholeheartely. Do we all agree that we need separate networks for NDI internet? This was Mike. So yeah, I mean, it depends, I think was the outcome there, but VLANs, at least VLANing your network and keeping it isolated is always a great practice, because that helps eliminate a lot of like what else is interfering with the network conversation. So that's always good there. There are a couple of things here that were like in the moment. Tom had a networking question. If I have time, I always have time, Tom, whenever you need, man. You should ask. If time allows, John will surely answer it. Oh, go web. I appreciate that. Thank you. Hey, thanks, Tom. That was for Tom Sinclair, I'm sure. I'm guessing I need more schooling. Is John monitoring this chat? I absolutely am. But please go ahead and ask your questions. But there are other guys that are in the chat as well. You really need to diagnose the reasons why someone wants to go with NDI before you let them do it. Some reasons are more valid than others. That's interesting. I mean, as much as I want to shove NDI onto every single network, there are good reasons to use it and there are better reasons to use it. And so, yeah, there's a lot to discuss there. But yeah, I mean, you really do also need to understand, you're not just doing it because it's cool, right? You're doing it because you have a valid reason. You'll get better results and probably more funding if you have a valid reason for doing it and not just because it's cool. Any views on redundancy in NDI? Actually, I go over this in some of that networking discussion, but really, I'm assuming you're talking about, are you, Go Web, if you're still around, are you talking about redundancy at the NDI video level, or are you talking about redundancy on the networking level? Because that's two different things, but two conversations that we definitely should have. So maybe we should talk about that in an upcoming show. You're always good. You have great show ideas. Every time you post stuff, I'm always like, that would make a great show. So we're maybe going to talk about that. Hey, what's that heating issue, Glenn? Yeah, it looked like his camera was maybe having some overheating issues, and he was having to restart his computer. That's always frustrating when you're trying to do a live show. Frustrating as a participant, because you could tell that he was really frustrated with that camera. If only I should maybe just ship him something. But anyways, a fiber connection to the cameras instead of a networking connection, so that it's ready from the start. Interesting. So that's interesting. We're not doing anything about that right now, but it is, I mean, if you're running a fiber infrastructure, that's kind of a unique situation. I don't see there being a big enough market, honestly. The big thing with NDI, especially BirdDog, is the single cable installation. So you can plug it in and it powers it up and it gives you NDI video and you can control it and all that, right? Single cable install. When you do fiber, you have to power it individually because there's no PoE, and you have to, like, the modules need to be the same on both sides, and you need to talk about multi-mode over single mode, and there's a few other like added layers of complexity, but you would never have a bottleneck problem, that's for sure. If you don't write it down somewhere, you will answer the same question a zillion times. That is the truth, my friend. That's why we have a knowledge database, and my agents are constantly sending articles. Hey, we have an article about this. Check this out. It is a big time saver. I don't know if customers particularly like being redirected to knowledge database, but we do have a knowledge database with a bunch of answers in there. So if you have questions and you don't like submitting tickets, and I'm not doing a live show, check out the knowledge database. They might find your answer there. I have two rooms. I have a sanctuary we're going to call S, and I have a fellowship hall we're going to call FH. Currently, I have two GS108P version 3s, one in each room. I just got a 4250 10 gig PoE Plus. Ooh, that's a beautiful switch. Plus vMix CPU in the sanctuary. I'm thinking about having the 4250 in the sanctuary room with two GSs in the fellowship hall. Planning to use VLAN 10. Can I connect these? And how would I set up the GS? Well, ideally, you would run home runs back from the GS units back to your 4250. The 4250 will, if you're, well, hang on, let me look up the specs real quick because I want to get this right. You have a GS108 PE version 3 switch. Okay. So these little guys are strictly just 8-port PoE switches is what they are. They're not the layer 2 switch. They're just basically, unmanaged switches. So you would just run a single Cat 6 run, put it on port 8, one of the non-PoE ports, back to the M4250, and allow the 4250 to run in layer 3. So set up a profile, set up a DHCP server in there. I have a little video that shows how to do that. So you could check that out on the BirdDog YouTube page. How to actually set up the 4250 for DHCP. And then you would run those two unmanaged switches back. Now, not a huge fan of unmanaged switches because there's a lot going on there that's not performance. It's not great when it comes to utilizing the switch's ability. But anyways, regardless, you could run those back and you should be all right. You really want the 4250 though to be the brains of the operation. And so I strongly suggest that you let that 4250 handle the VLAN information and handle the ports that are going off to then the fellowship hall. Do you need that many ports in the fellowship hall? Like, you're going to get 7 available in the fellowship hall. So if you needed that many, I guess so. Avoid, fight the urge to daisy chain the two unmanaged switches together. Okay, do home runs from the 4250 over to each of the switches. At least do that, because that will help eliminate some frustration when it comes to packets bouncing around. Interactive PDF so that there are clickable links to play videos in the document. As long as those video links stay the same, we don't break them the first time we update them. I put together the documentation side first and base my video content on that documentation. Oh, that's a good suggestion. Round table NDI networking discussion, the fellowship of the stream. Thank you. Did that change it? I hope it did. Balu just changed the stream. Yeah, Nightbot. That's great. I always bring my own. Balu is one of my my mods, by the way, and over on Twitch. So I always bring my own NDI router, and I sit between my network and the house. So that lets me also have a cellular bonding backup for streaming without worrying about the house. See, that's now we're talking about a level of sophistication that NetHab definitely brings a new layer of sophistication to his NDI networks. Well done. That's a great way to do it, by the way. Tutorial videos are better, says Live on iPhone from Warsaw, Poland. I appreciate that advocacy. I can respect the request for both. I think that that's very wise to have both available. And so, like what John was saying, is we can hand this to the guy that's in the networking room and saying, look, this is what I need. And then they can go through and, okay, he needs VLANs. He wants it to be on here. He needs it to be like this. And they can go through and set it up accordingly. But also, if you're like the jack of all trades at your church and you're setting up the network yourself, here are some videos, click this button, do this thing, that's on a more basic level. So I can appreciate both. And I think that that's a valid enough for me to do that. How to isolate NDI internet when streaming via vMix, where you need both together. So we went over that at the networking level. We did go over that. Tom Sinclair is the equal to Brad Pitt. Okay, so Go Web, yeah, we kind of went over that, right? Where we VLAN off and we use a computer that has 2 NIC cards, and sometimes you can get away with these extra, Ethernet dongles. But like Glenn had said in that, in that example, is that was the choke point for that customer. Had nothing to do with BirdDog, had nothing to do with the M4250, nothing to do with the NDI infrastructure. It was the $10 USB thing, and it got on Amazon that ended up causing the error, and then he was good to go. And we had it was like a calling of all of the, it was like the round table discussion. The nights of the roundtable discussion, we had BirdDog, the head of BirdDog support. We had Glenn, who is like one of the head dogs over at Broadfield when it comes to integration. We had Netgear on the line. So we had developers from Netgear, and we had this customer and the installer, and we were all there to address this drop frame issue. And then come to find out it was this. So it was like, oh man, it was brutal. But anyway, so ideally that's how I do it, is I'd separate it, have 2 NIC cards on your computer and go one into your VLAN and one out to the internet network, and never the two shall meet. The only bridge will be then obviously the computer that will bridge those 2 networks. John says, if you want to discuss redundancy, we might be interested in look at multi-TCP on an infrastructure side. So yeah, true. We definitely we didn't even go down the protocol side, but multi-TCP is a great answer for some of that, and the multicast realm is the other realm there, which we've talked a little bit here, but multicast is really one of those pieces that once you start getting into larger installs, multicast is the way to do it, because it lowers the network load. And maybe I'll do a demonstration on Thursday or next week about multicast, because I'm running several of these cameras in multicast because they go to various places on the network, and we don't want to be duplicating those packets. We want that to be the network's responsibility. So if you don't know what it is that I'm talking about there, join us in a future show when we briefly talk about multicast to the extent of my ability, which is not very much. Hey, how do I get a BirdDog hoodie, John? You have to know some people to get one of these. You have to work for the company. No, yeah, I think Eamon. I don't know. There's not a whole lot of swag out there right now, so we're working on that. But there's not a whole lot. Hey, if you need ideas for a live, let's talk about TCP over multicast in detail someday. Okay, so that's funny. I just said that, and then one of the next comments was that. So yeah, we should probably do that, eh? Julio says fiber on cameras are overkill and will likely make cameras way more expensive. Just use fiber between two fiber to copper Ethernet converters if said use case is in play. Oh, these are managed switches, Tom says. Okay, good to know. Getting to the end of it apparently, because now Tom, I'm catching up with comments. So this idea is okay. I don't have any point-to-point fiber module things that I would recommend as of right now, but I'm about to do an install with some of them that we're going to give it a go. So if I have good results, I'll let you know. But yes, you could just do the fiber end-to-end and do Ethernet into that little converter and then across. But I'm not saying I know of one that works without, problems. And so stay tuned for more information on that, because there's more to talk about that. So those GSs were managed switches. Okay, so that's good. That gives us some flexibility when it comes to that. I have one PTZ keyboard. Two P200s moving between the two rooms, two flex 4K ins, one move between rooms, and one fixed, and two flex outs, both on a kiosk and a multi-viewer. One Pi running companion. Ooh. Fixed to the Sanctuary, a laptop for BirdDog control apps located in Sanctuary, one Mac used for ProPresenter, which is fixed into the Fellowship Hall. Okay, this is we're adding up the NDI streams now. And okay, so that's basically it. So yeah, you got a fair bit going on here. And there's a whole bunch of manufacturers at play. For consistent results, I would definitely do. All right, you need to go over to the BirdDog YouTube page after the show and check out the videos that I did on configuring that 4250. I think that's your answer. Reserve DHCP IP addresses to give them static addresses. So set up the DHCP reservation list, update that switch, the latest firmware, by the way. Set up a DHCP VLAN for that switch, and then put that VLAN on all the ports that you want to run NDI on. Especially on those managed ones, and then see how that goes. I think that's probably where you need to start. And if you are flooding your network, like if your network can't keep up because of those lighter switches, then you probably need to talk about a multicast solution. But we can go down that road if you need to when you get to that place. I don't want to push you down multicast yet, because can be a lot. The one option you might have is to run this in DHCP, but run a discovery server. And I've done videos on discovery server in the past as well. And so you may consider doing that. If you're getting like inconsistent results, not necessarily a lot of like drop frames, but if you're getting inconsistent results with the network infrastructure, you've set it up as my videos outline, then you could set up Discovery Server. The thing about it is every device needs to know about Discovery Server. So if you have a computer, you need to have Access Manager. If you're using BirdDog devices, you need to turn on Discovery Server and put in the IP address of where that Discovery Server is. And then that might give you better results, because Discovery Server actually quiets the network traffic. Like it lowers the network threshold. And so there are benefits of running DS in a DHCP network if you're kind of at the pinnacle of your network capabilities, but you need it to operate a little bit better. It eliminates all the broadcasts, and so that opens up some bandwidth for you to use. So good stuff there. Living that mod life. Yeah, Balu, thank you, man. Thanks for keeping an eye on that. Written notes and video tutorials are equally good. Yes, so they have their place, right? And again, like the panel was saying, they definitely, depending on the personality and the type of person that is needing assistance, instructions are great, or hands-on tutorials, or like really like layman's terms, like dumbed right down so that the guy who's never done this before can do it. That's, I think that's where there's going to be 3 lanes that I'm going to swim in. It's going to be entry level, a little more advanced, and then the written notes. And that's as far. I don't want to do like advanced networking for you network administrator. Like that's not, NDI is not supposed to get into that world. If you need that level, you need to talk to a network administrator, I think, at that, and not come to the manufacturer for those questions. I am one of those unofficial publicists from BirdDog these days. Where's my hoodie? You should have gotten it from Jason when he was in when you were over at the conference. I don't think Jason had any swag, but anyways. Hey, don't buy NDI from Amazon. There's more to that story, that's for sure. Something's up there, but I'd love to hear more about that. TKDS, TK421. That's more complicated than my golf kit. That's why I don't do churches. There you go. And here's the thing about what Tom is talking about. Tom, this setup that he's laid out here, this is exactly what happens at churches. They get like a 8-port Unify switch and they plug in their 3 cameras and a keyboard, and they realize this stuff is so cool. And they're like, let's put this in the fellowship hall. Let's put this down in the youth room. Let's put this over here. Let's do this on the roof. Let's do all this crazy stuff in the parking lot. And the NDI requirements go from like 3 cameras and a keyboard to like, boom. Like now we got all these flexes and we got all these now Companion and Pro Presenter does NDI. And we got all this like, whoa. So this is a great example of just stuff getting like it doing what NDI does, which is being super cool, and everybody wanted to be on board. So and like let's do more of this. Well, with that comes the conversation about, can your network handle that? So good stuff there. It looks like I've missed a whole bunch since I'm late. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that a network guy that doesn't know NDI would need to know so I can figure out our new office? Basically, I talked to guys in the industry today about what do they recommend, what do they see, what are they doing, when does an oversimplified network work, and when do you steer clear, all that sort of stuff. And so yeah, it was a good chat today. Your new office, I'd be curious as to like what networking equipment you're using, because depending on what that answer is, we could go down certain roads for that. So BirdDog sells on Amazon, so I think that's okay. BirdDogs are for sale on Amazon. BirdDog does not sell on Amazon. Some retailer does. So heads up about that. Make sure that it's make sure that there's an email to contact your seller, because that's gonna, if you need help, that's gonna be like the first thing out of the gate. So yes, Dave, there are BirdDog products on there, and there are reputable retailers that sell on Amazon. Okay. But just buyer beware, because Amazon, like BirdDog doesn't have an Amazon store, and we actually don't sell direct, and neither does Broadfield for that matter. They don't have an Amazon store. So heads up. AWS docs are so well written that you can be your own solution architect. Oh, maybe we should check that out, because I need some examples of do this, not that, right? Hey, let's do this on the roof. I'm glad you caught that. That was that was a little something extra. Thanks. I enjoyed the stream and the networking stream. Awesome. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate what you're doing. Specifically, like, hey, if you want to talk about that church network, like I said, I would really stick with the M4250 acting as your layer 3, and then going home runs from the fellowship hall back to the sanctuary and plugging into 2 ports on that 4250, because that will eliminate a lot of like extra packet flow that happens on that level of switch that you have for the fellowship hall. And so have the 4250 do the governance and do the routing and do all of that. It will make the world of difference to pull 2 cables instead of 1, if you are looking to do that. And then reference those setup videos for the 4250, do DHCP on those. And if you need to set static IP addresses on the devices, follow the DHCP, get everything done. And then the last thing you do is set up the DHCP reservation list on the 4250, and you should be good to go. And then come back and tell me if you think I'm totally full of it or if it worked for you, because those are always helpful to find out. So out of control. Best switches to use: PoE, Texas, and Netgear for video. Texas. Best switches to use. I mean, like I said earlier, the only one that does an NDI profile right now is Netgear. So the 4250 and the 4300 are the kind of go-to right now, but they're the only ones that are really throwing a lot of their development team behind the protocol. So we don't get paid to tout switches. I wish I did, because Netgear would owe me a bundle in royalties. But we're we're also keeping them in business a fair bit, promoting their stuff, and then they talk to us about the profile, and they make sure that we're fully compatible with them. And we have good friends over at Netgear, and I love those guys. They're great. And so I can't speak. I have only good things to say about that Netgear crew. The Netgear crew. And with that being said, I'll even do them another one. If you have questions about setting up the 4250, they have a great team at Pro AV Design at netgear.com. So they have a great support system. They believe in their NDI profile. Shoot them a message. They've always, treated me really well with a lot of respect and a lot of, they don't treat me like a dummy. So definitely reach out to them if you have networking questions. If you're using the 4250, Tom, that's a little bonus for you if you're still here. They do have a support email, and I recommend that you utilize that if you need them to. So, hey, I don't know yet our whole network setup. I know Unify manages the Wi-Fi, unsure about wired. I can see a handful of NDI cameras and play 4Ks in our future over time, over gigabit at some point. So Unify will be okay. I don't like the Gen 2 stuff. So if you're buying new, I like Glenn's philosophy. Let the IT guys buy their Unify stuff and whatever, but make them buy you a 4250 for anything that plugs in over NDI. Because Glenn was like, that's great. You handle the NDI stuff. You do the network, and you do the phones, and you do the Wi-Fi, do all that. But give me a 4250 and let me manage that, because that switch needs to be isolated, first of all, on its own VLAN. So the networking guy should be fine with that, because you're not doing anything. But like, give me an actual NDI switch, and you'll save a lot of your headache, because Unify is fine, but Unify runs on especially the Gen 2 stuff. It runs on a OS, like the whole processing stuff happens on the Unify OS. And it's just not as good as the Gen 1 stuff. I just haven't had a lot of success with it. So I use the PoE Texas switches. They also work. Well, there you go. I don't have any exposure with that. So you'll have to tell me all about that. My golf kit uses PoE Texas for the remote holes. Oh, cool. Interesting. Very cool. Since the keyboard NDI just came out, the keyboard, you probably mean the firmware. I'm about to update to the latest firmware on my P200 kit. Can you refresh my mind on the process of what to do and in what order of the steps? Absolutely. If you are on LTS for the P200s, all you need to do is the system update on the firmware. So if you're running the latest LTS version from the website for the P200s, all you need to do is the firmware update, step 2, for the camera, and it'll move you to NDI 5. It's 0.64. That's what this camera is running, which is the primary P200. The primary camera in this studio is a P200, which is what we're looking at today. So you just need to do the firmware update. If you're not on LTS and you're pre-LTS, then you need to do step 1, step 2, which is the USB update, and then the firmware update. And this will update your baseboard. In the manual, it tells you what the baseboard should be when you're done the update. Don't proceed to the firmware update until you confirm the baseboard is correct, and then go on from there. But really, you should go to the latest LTS and then do the NDI 5 firmware update, and you're good to go. Okay. But that new keyboard update's also pretty slick. So pretty excited about that, because it introduces a bunch of API stuff. Hey, probably 3 cameras, a few screens, and a few plays. Gotcha. Yeah, 3 cameras, so you're 500 megs, a few screens, so you're another, let's say 300, and then a few plays. So you really need to have, between, I would say, depend. Oh, and are you doing? Oh, screen captures. Are you doing this across multiple switches, like through a trunk? Or is this all going to be in one location? Because you'd probably be okay with a single switch, but you might consider spreading it out over 2 for this, because that's a lot of like back and forth and packets that are going through. So, yeah, Netgear and BirdDog together is called what now? Symbolus? Okay, cool. I'll have to Google that because I'm not familiar with that term. The POE Texas guy is really cool. There you go. All right. I'm gonna have to check that out now. If Tom jumps back on the show and says that's the real deal, then I'm gonna have to look that up because I'm not familiar and I probably should be. So alrighty. Well, we have made it to the end of the chat and to the end of a 2 hour and 10-minute show. I knew this show was going to go long because whenever I have people to talk to on this show, I talk for a long time. Oh man, I had so much fun. I love talking to people like just in the industry. It was so good to have these guys on the show. Special thanks again for giving me a chance to, talk with you and to just kind of hang on one second. Having a chance just to kind of go over what the market's up to. I mean, what things are, what are they seeing? What are they encountering? Can the manufacturer do better by listening to, the market? And of course, we always can do better by listening. But I want to be sure that we are talking the same language. I don't want to go ahead and produce a bunch of content, whatever, that is irrelevant, right? I want to be sure that we're talking about things that A, people care about, and B, that it really makes a big difference when it comes to you guys getting your NDI networks up to speed. And so hopefully you have found today's conversation useful. Oh, it's symbiosis. Okay, gotcha. A relationship between two people, organizations, and the benefit of them both. It's true. That is very much so the case when it comes to Netgear and BirdDog. We're mutually interested in the same outcome. But look, I hope that you guys have found something beneficial today. It's always nice to see someone's face other than mine. And I mean, if Tom Sinclair is going to be on the show, you got to tune in because it's going to be worth it. Price of admission alone will be definitely worth it. And so super grateful though to have those guys on the show. I hope that I can have them back. I might do a little bit more individual chats with them because I didn't really get a chance to dig into every single person's realm, but they have deep, knowledge bases of their own. And that was one of the pieces, is just bring them together and let them talk for a few minutes and see where they're at. And have a good discussion together. And so hopefully you found that beneficial. I really like that format. We should do that more often. Maybe I will. So maybe we'll go with that. Hopefully you're having a great start to the week. It is Tuesday and it is Tuesday afternoon here in Michigan. The week is trudging along. And so lots of things coming up now. Just heads up. We have Thanksgiving this month here in the US. And so there will be a week where there's just a single show on a Tuesday. That's later on in a few weeks. And so the office will officially be closed. We won't be doing a show during that time. And then late in the year, obviously, we have a week off for Christmas. And so there will be 2 shows that we missed after Christmas. So I think that's like the 27th and 29th. Those days, there would be no shows. And then, of course, we kick it off again in the new year. We're back in the office right after New Year's. So we would be back in on Tuesday. Probably do a show on the 2nd. But if you're looking for support help and that sort of thing, the office will be closed during those times. So just a heads up, we're going to be taking a little breather on the support realm and let my guys have a few days off to celebrate with their families the Thanksgiving season and, of course, the holiday season when it comes around to Christmas. So just let's start putting that out there early that might be happening, and just making sure we give you all more warning. Where in Michigan? We are in Auburn Hills in Michigan. And so I have been in Michigan for a long time now, like 15 years or something like that. That's crazy. I'm a Canadian at heart, but I married a girl and we had a family and bought a house and all that stuff. Same old story. So I got stuck in Michigan. That's a beautiful state though, and lots of good people. Matter of fact, a lot of those good people I know, I hired to work with me, and so I get to work with them out in the lobby. But yeah, we should definitely bring out the big guns more often. That seems to be a fun conversation. So, anyways, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you. Thank you for spending 2 hours of your day with us. I hope that you have found this beneficial. I know I have. I've really enjoyed chatting and making some connections with the network, but also hearing from them and understanding better as to what challenges they're addressing. And so if you missed today's show and you're just joining us now, you missed a good one. Maybe go back and watch it when you have a couple hours to play something in the background on your second monitor. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we will see you on Thursday for another show. Now on Thursday, I'm going to have another guest on, a highly requested guest, hoping that's still the plan. And then we're going to have a guest on Thursday. And then Thursday at noon, we're going to have the NDI watch party. So be sure that you join me Thursday at noon. We're going to watch the webinar from NDI. So it's a PTZ optics and NDI networking discussion. So that sounds fun. And we're going to have a little chat over top of the webinar. So join us. Don't go watch it at NDI's. Watch it on our show. I don't know if they know I'm doing that. I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for doing that. But anyways, I signed up to watch the webinar. And you can come and watch it with me on Thursday at noon. So I'll be on at 11. But at noon, we're going to fire up the webinar and watch that together. So hopefully you can join us for that. And that should be good times and find out what it is they're saying over there. And then we'll talk about what we want to say. Should be good. Should be fun. And who knows, maybe I'll try and find some other BirdDog guys to hang around with me and chat as well. So could be good stuff. Can't wait. Take care. Love you.
Kids, you tried your best, and you failed miserably. The lesson is, never try.